Welcome to the Resilience Series. I'm Stephanie Weaver, the author of the Migraine Relief Plan and the upcoming Migraine Relief Plan cookbook. And for that project, I'm interviewing a variety of people about living well while managing a chronic condition like migraine. My guest today is Eileen Brewer. Eileen is a patient advocate, president of Cluster Busters, and the founder of Retreat Migraine, a program sponsored by CHAMP, the Coalition for Headache and Migraine Patients. Welcome, Eileen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
You're so welcome. I'm glad to have you here too. So tell us first about your experience with migraine.
Well, I'm pretty sure I've had migraine attacks for my entire life. But the first one I really remember was when I was 5 years old. I got spinal meningitis, and that caused excruciating head pain. And since then, you can kind of look at my school records and see the progression. I wasn't diagnosed at the time. I was just like recovering from spinal meningitis. But by the time I was a teenager, I was having migraine attacks every day. And I still didn't have a diagnosis. And my parents kind of thought, well, she just doesn't want to go to school, because I really didn't want to go to school when I was 15. But when I did go to school, I met somebody else who had migraine disease, and she was just sitting there one day describing her life to me. And I was like, wow, you're describing my life. So I went home and I told my parents that I thought that I was having migraine attacks. And so we went to the pediatrician, who completely dismissed it. He was like, oh, you're fine. But then I asked this friend of mine again, like, who do you see? And she saw a guy named Dr. Speed. And so I went back to my parents and I was like, can I just go see this doctor and talk to him? And so they facilitated that. They took me to see the doctor, and he was like, well, you textbook have migraine and you're chronic. And so he made recommendations for treatments. This was before triptans were a thing, but he knew that triptans were coming to market. So he told us about that and how exciting and promising it was, and reassured me that, you know, there were things that we could do to manage my migraine disease. And the very first thing he did was give me this long list of foods that I shouldn't eat, told me all about an elimination diet. And, but he told me about other lifestyle changes to make. And he was like, so here's the things that you can control, and then here's the things that we can do medically. And, then he retired. And so that kind of sucked. But that's how migraine for me began. Unfortunately, despite all of the things that I've tried, I have been chronic daily since I was 16 years old. I had one brief break of relief with migraine attacks when I found like the right combination of medications that worked for me, plus some therapy and some other things that I was doing at the time. But it eventually stopped working. So, but I haven't really lost hope. That was a wonderful 6 months of my life, and I'm sure I'll have that again someday.
Yeah. So I heard a couple things. I heard you advocating for yourself. I heard information being shared by another patient that was incredibly helpful to you. I heard a doctor actually listening and validating that you were not making something up. And I heard, hopefulness about, new treatments coming down the road, and here's things you can try. And also it's common for all of us to say, well, I just already feel terrible, and now you're telling me I have to do a bunch of stuff that doesn't sound fun, that may or may not work. So yeah, I think that it was super relatable, like everything you said. So how did you get involved with advocacy? Where do you feel like advocacy started for you? Do you have a starting point, or was it a gradual thing?
Well, my parents taught me about being a charitable human being. I used to do Meals on Wheels runs with my mom, and they were both members of the JCs and did all kinds of charity projects. So as an adult, I kind of have always thought that it's my responsibility to volunteer and do things. And I'm a really fortunate person, so giving back has always been the thing. And I used to work in the cancer community, doing volunteer projects and helping with event coordination and stuff. And that unfortunately got to be really depressing. I am a cancer survivor. My mother and my mother-in-law both passed away from cancer. So it's really been a huge part of my world. But working in that I don't want to call it an industry, but in that community, it was like I was going to funerals all the time. I always knew people that were passing away, or that were really sick, or that had their, entire financial and health wise lives impacted by this. And I just found it myself being like sucked down by it. And I was like, I don't want to stop volunteering, but what other community can I go to and offer help and maybe learn from? And it started to think, well, cancer has been a really big impact on my life, but migraine is a bigger impact on my life. So let me find out what there is to do in the migraine community to volunteer and to help. And so I found the American Headache and Migraine Association, which doesn't exist anymore. But at the time, they were having their first meeting in Scottsdale, Arizona. And so I had a 1-year-old daughter at the time, and I just told my husband, I was like, so I'm going to go to Arizona for a couple of days. I'll be right back. I promise. I just have to go and meet these people. And then I found out that Bob Wold was going to be there. And I was like, well, I'm actually like absolutely going to go, because I had seen YouTube videos, him talking about what he does. And I was like, I have a chance to meet this guy, and in a setting that would make sense for me to just meet him. And so I went to Arizona. And
so who is Bob Wold, for those of us who don't know the name?
Bob Wold is the founder and now executive director of Clusterbusters. He started Clusterbusters due to wanting to help people living with cluster headache find better treatment options, considering there weren't at the time very many treatment options for people living with cluster headache. And he and some people back in the wild west of the internet started talking about using psilocybin to treat cluster headache, and they were discovering that it worked. And so he started putting together a huge body of anecdotal evidence for it, since at the time there was no research possibilities for this.
Right. And what's cluster headache, for people who don't know what cluster is?
So there's a bunch of different kinds of headache disease. We're all talking about migraine, and migraine is the most prevalent one. Like 1 in 7 people have migraine. Cluster headache, a lot of people will tell you, is a rare form of headache. It's not really rare, because a rare disease is defined. What's the word I'm looking for here? A rare disease is defined as something where less than 200,000 people have that disease. Cluster headache, there's like 1 million people that have cluster headache, probably. We don't know for sure. There's never been a study to tell us, but it is known as the worst pain known to man, kind of like complex regional pain syndrome and trigeminal neuralgia. It's on that level of being really horrific pain. Cluster headaches, they last from 40 minutes to 3 hours, and they come in these clusters. That's why they're called cluster headaches, where you might get attacks every day at the same time, or 8 attacks every day at the same times for a period of 3 months. And that's your cluster period. And then they go away, unless you're one of the few people that's unfortunate enough to be chronic, in which case you get these attacks every day for your whole life, which is pretty horrifying.
Yeah.
And the attacks are not like migraine attacks where you want to go into a room and lay down and be in the dark. You pace, you yell, you don't care really about what else is going on around you. Some people slam their head into a wall or the floor, or hit themselves in the head. Just pretty much anything they can think of to try and make the pain stop, but it doesn't. But then when the attack goes away, it goes away until you have the next one.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So first of all, clearly you've talked about it a lot, and that was a great description. And also, it's terrible. And one of the reasons why I ended up writing my book was I was just so shocked that migraine just didn't have a bigger presence. When I found out it was 1 in 7 people, 1 in 5 women, I'm like, well, why don't we hear about this all the time? And why aren't people talking about it? And I just posted something on social media, like a migraine gift guide. And I had so many people respond, like, I had no idea. I was like, it's 1 in 5 women, ask your friends. And everybody came back like, I had no idea. I have 3 friends that have migraine and they never talk about it. So, and then cluster headache is a related condition that is awful. And so it's so encouraging just to know there's an organization like Cluster Busters that's out there, that there are these organizations. What do you feel like you get from being the president of Cluster Busters? Because you don't actually suffer from cluster headaches, but you are serving the community in this way. What does it give to you to do this?
Well, so after I went to Arizona and I met Bob Wold. He asked if I would help organize. Well, after some time getting to know me, he asked if I would help organize their conference. And my first introduction to the cluster headache community was showing up with my 3-month-old son at the first Cluster Busters conference that I organized, which was their 10th annual conference. And what I met was these people who were living with this horrible disease that I had heard about and was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And seeing them have attacks, but the atmosphere was this joy and this love, and these people who were busy celebrating every moment of life that they had that wasn't consumed by these painful attacks. And I was like, I want this for my people. I want this for people living with migraine. Like, these people taught me how to how to live in the moment, and how to love everything that you can possibly squeeze out of life. And it was like a real huge example of these people with this mindset. And so they have given me a new way to think about life. And they also they're really dedicated to their disease and to finding ways to cure their disease, or to treat their disease if they can't find a cure. And so people being willing to do whatever it takes is another thing that I really respect and I love about that community.
That's awesome. And just to be clear, so you mentioned earlier psilocybin, that's the psychedelic mushrooms that there's a fantastic book by Michael Pollan about the use of psychedelics in medicine and the whole history of how they were being used. And then due to conservative politicians, they became unavailable to be used for research. And now that is changing again. And so it is very hopeful. So we're not talking about people, tripping and going to a movie. We're talking about in a clinical setting, very specifically having, I think, guided experiences to deal with their pain. And it's very exciting to hear that that is changing.
So unfortunately, that's not exactly true.
Okay.
So yes, there is Michael Pollan. He's wonderful. He wrote a really good book. When we talk about using psilocybin in guided experiences, we're talking more about people who are using psilocybin to treat diseases like depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of people with cluster headache do live with post-traumatic stress disorder. And a side effect of using psilocybin is that it helps to treat that. But most people who have cluster headache who use psilocybin to treat it, they don't do it in a clinical setting.
Are they microdosing then?
So, well, it depends on the person, really.
Okay.
As to like, some people take a half a gram and they're fine, and some people take much more because that's what they need to treat it. But the problem with having cluster headache and using psilocybin is that sometimes you have to use it every 5 days or once a week, and to go on these guided experiences in a doctor's office or to go to a clinical setting would be not just inconvenient, but really impractical for
Yeah.
everybody involved, the doctor's office as well as the person. So unfortunately, there's becoming this thing in the community where it's like, well, we understand talking about this in a clinical setting, but we also understand the need to maybe move away from that for some medical purposes. So,
That's
but
great. That's super helpful to clarify. And I also would say that it's, to me, it sounds sort of similar to people using cannabis and figuring out, that there's like a research side where they're working on that and they're trying to get it approved. And then there's people who are like, I can't wait. So I got to figure out which strains work for me. And so yeah, because you've described it as, it's the most excruciating pain humans can experience. So if you've got something that's going to work, I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't do that. So,
yeah,
okay.
And that's kind of where we are with it.
Yeah. And thank you for clarifying, because that's really helpful. Sure. And I didn't actually know it was being used for cluster. So it's really helpful to understand that. And that's hopeful for anybody who's watching who experiences cluster headaches. You have another option that maybe you hadn't considered.
Well, okay. Right, and there is research that is ongoing about it, as far as how to safely do it and all that. So just keep looking out for the research, because I don't want to tell anybody that, sure, this I'm not writing a prescription and I'm not a doctor.
Of
Talk
course.
to your doctor.
Yes, absolutely. So this is, I think this is a good segue, because you talked about the experience of being at the first Cluster Busters meeting. And I want you to tell us about Retreat Migraine. How did you get the idea? Where did it come from? What have the first two been like? And what are your hopes for the future for that?
I mean, I just copied what Cluster Busters did. No, I really did want to find a way to bring the spirit of what Cluster Busters is doing to the migraine community. And so I thought we could create a conference that was just for people living with migraine disease. A lot of time everybody is like, well, we'll do migraine, but we'll include all of these other diseases. And then the cluster headache patients come in and they're like, well, we're better than you because our pain is worse than yours. And that's not really the case. And that's not really what they say. But you wind up in a room full of people that have different diseases. But if you create a space just for people who live with migraine disease, then they can feel completely comfortable not having to explain themselves, not having to ever say to another person, oh, well, this is happening because I'm having a migraine. Like, everybody in the room is going to get it and understand. So you come at this experience with like this comfort level already, and then you can move beyond that and get to a place where you can learn new things, learn new skills, and be completely open to other things, where you're not feeling defensive from the very start. And so that's what I wanted for Retreat Migraine. I also wanted a place where people can connect with, caregivers and researchers and people who offer products and items that can help people with migraine, to have a safe space to interact with those things, to find out about those things, where they don't feel so much like, oh, well, head on, put directly on your head, like you see the commercials. Like, that feels really awkward. But if you're in this safe space already, then interacting with people who are putting out these things to help people with migraine is a better way to do it.
Great. And so the first one was in San Antonio last year, 2019.
Yep.
And it was a whole weekend at a hotel. Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. Shout out to Kevin Lenneberg, who is the executive director of Coalition for Headache and Migraine Patients, who gave me this platform and the ability to do it. We shopped around a lot of locations, but San Antonio, that hotel was awesome. It had like a salt cave, and it had a really nice area around it. It was quieter. It wasn't like in the middle of a bustling city. So it seemed like a good location.
That's great. And so you had to do it virtually this past year, 2020, but 2021, you're going to be in California, right?
Yep. We were planning to go to Redondo Beach this year, but we will put that off until next year. Looking forward to that.
Great. So awesome. So what role do you think resilience plays in migraine wellness?
I think it depends on who you are. I mean, if you are a person who has migraine disease and you're very episodic, then I think that resilience talks about how you rebound from these really bad days and let it go and move on with your life. But for somebody like me, my approach to resilience is different because I am in pain every single day. And so there's never it's going to be better another day. It's not getting better. And some days are worse than others. Sure, some days I can't see at all or speak well. But for me, it's just about, you know, putting all those symptoms aside and focusing on what's important to me. I have done some of the greatest things that I've ever done in my life on one of my worst migraine days, because I try always to find ways to just live, to take those lessons that I learned from cluster busters, from the cluster heads that are living in their moment every moment and just really celebrating life. So I think that resilience is about finding joy in whatever it is that you're doing. And some days are really suck, but sometimes you can find joy in just doing a puzzle or sending a text message to somebody and telling them that you are thinking of them. And so I think resilience is about finding these moments.
Great. What are some self-care resilience strategies that you personally employ and find really helpful?
I've never stopped making plans, even though I know that I'm going to have to cancel things. I don't stop. I don't ever think, well, I can't ever go to a concert again, or, well, I can't do this, or I always think I'm going to try. And maybe it doesn't work out, but I always, that's the biggest thing. I'm going to try. I'm not going to cancel my life because I have a disease. I want to be a participant in it. And the other thing that I do all the time is I recognize that this disease brings with it, like, one of my worst symptom is the cognitive part, where I know that I am losing memories and I am losing things. So just like you would tell somebody who might be going down the road of dementia, exercise your brain every day, as much as you can. And don't make it like a responsibility. Like, a lot of times we think about all of these things that we're supposed to do for migraine, like it's this responsibility. It becomes heavy. It's like, well, I can't eat that, and I can't go out because the weather's going to be bad, or it's going to be too sunny, and you get weighed down by living under all of these rules. So I don't think about it like that, but I like to think about it like I'm going to find joy in doing a logic puzzle, or joy in doing a math problem or something, or whatever it is that makes your brain work well. Or I'm going to find joy in cooking a really fantastic meal that took all of my focus to do the sauce perfectly, or whatever. So I think that exercising your mind, as much as exercising your body or anything else that you might do to stay healthy, is a really important thing for resilience.
That's awesome. Thank you. No one else has said that, so I love that I'm getting all these different answers. So I love it. Eileen, thank you again for being here today and sharing your story. Learn more about Retreat Migraine at headachemigraine.org. And check out other episodes of the Resilience series on Facebook Watch, YouTube, and IGTV. Follow me, S. Weaver, MPH, to learn more about my upcoming book, The Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook, which is due out in spring 2022 from Surrey Books. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you for having me.